Good morning. The poet Audre Lorde said, "When we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid, so it is better to speak." I have been working on getting over my fear of speaking. I know those of you who know me are thinking, Ayanna has a fear of speaking. I do when it comes to certain topics. You see, I've often gone through life using diplomacy and tact, not rocking the boat. As a result, I didn't speak up when people would say problematic things. I put up with a lot. But now I feel that it is better for me to speak up. Better for me, better for others. I do so not in order to hurt other people, but in an effort to help change the tenor of conversation. I'm going to tell you something that might come as something of a shock. Here it is. It is not fun to be an African American. I know the popular media has you thinking otherwise, and all you see are rich music artists and successful sports ball players. Even former President Obama looks all happy and relaxed in his photos now that he's no longer president. But the truth is, being Black is not all malt liquor and attractive people and million-dollar contracts. It's not all slam dunks and being able to dance and sing. And it is not for the weak of heart. Here's the thing. I am never allowed to forget that I am a different race from the majority. I am never allowed to forget that I am Black. My race affects everything, from how I drive, to how I interact with strangers, to how I shop, to where I eat. Simple actions, like smiling at people, are fraught with tension. Always being aware of my race and how I am perceived by others is exhausting, people. My life is not a music video. I am not wearing Gucci or gold bling or drinking expensive champagne by the pool. Heck, I'm not even drinking gin and juice in the hood. Everywhere I go, I have to be aware that people will make certain assumptions about me based on my appearance as an African American woman. Being able to function in the world without having to be aware and alert all the time is one of the defining features of privilege. I am not allowed that privilege. Let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. During his Christmas break from college, my older son Duncan and I spent a day hanging out in Los Angeles. We went to the last bookstore located in downtown, and then we went to an exclusive clothing store on Sunset called Kith, and it is Kith. We went there because he had been taken there by his step-uncle before, and he had discovered they had a little snack shop which would mix ice cream with your choice of sugar cereal. I was nervous about the impression that we would give the parking garage attendants. After all, my Honda CR-V wasn't fancy, it was a little dusty, and I have a bad habit of using it as a storage facility. But the attendants let us in after asking us our business. And as I sat and ate my ice cream while Duncan explored the store, I couldn't help but notice that aside from one of the employees, I was the only African American in the store. I'm used to that happening in Ventura County, but not in Los Angeles. Afterward, Duncan and I drove back home. On our way, we stopped at the Target in Westlake Village to buy him an electric razor. That's right, the boy shaves. I'm down with Target. I know Target. I've been shopping Target since I was a child. But the Target in Westlake is a special beast. Duncan and I paid for the razor and some other items, opting to not pay extra for the plastic bag, but just carry out our purchases. Big mistake. We were stopped at the door by the security guard, who demanded to see our receipt. I dug it out of my wallet. Thank goodness I didn't drop it into my purse, where I would never see it again. And I showed that we were not shoplifting. Afterwards, Duncan pondered whether we were stopped because he was carrying it and he was a young man, or because we were black. I had a feeling that race was the issue, because, after all, no one else was asked to stop and show their receipt. I swore to myself that from that day on, I would always pay extra for a bag if I had forgotten my own in the car. Saving myself the hassle was definitely worth it. I've recently started a new librarian position at a small university in Burbank. I'm now commuting about 30 miles one way to work through Simi Valley and the San Fernando Valley. For a while, I was considering moving from where I currently live in Moore Park to either be closer to where my younger son lives with his dad or to be closer to work. But Griffin doesn't mind my distance from his dad's house, which left the question of whether to move further in toward the valley. Moving for me is a complicated calculus problem. Not only do I have to take into consideration distance from my work and from church and from my boy, but also the racial makeup of the area I'm considering moving to and the chances of discrimination. For a brief moment, I considered moving to Simi Valley. It would still be close to Griffin, but plus living there would shorten my commute. Then I recalled the stares that our family endured at the Simi Valley Costco once upon a time. I remembered the fact that Simi was home to the jury that acquitted the police officers who beat up Rodney King. I flashed back to my friend's story about how the African-American son of a friend of hers had the cops called on him for the crime of being on the roof of his own house with a toy gun. Imagine your life being in danger because you were playing with a toy. Then I recalled the many times I've held my own breath driving through Simi, driving slower than usual, so as not to attract the notice of a police officer and risk getting pulled over, which is one of my greatest fears about Simi Valley cops. And then there was the story my half-uncle shared with me of when he decided to see a movie at the Simi Valley Town Center on his way out of town, and was the only person asked to expose the contents of his bag. All these stories combined in my mind and made me certain that I did not want to move to Simi Valley. Others may have the luxury of doing so, but I did not. I decided to renew my lease at my apartment in Moore Park. I'm really happy with my new job. One of the reasons I'm so glad to be there is because people's eyes used to slide off of me at my old place at the Camarillo Public Library. I'd be walking through the library, wearing the badge that proclaimed that I was an actual employee, and people would do their level best to not look at me. I would smile at them and say hello, and while their children might respond, the parents would look elsewhere. I noticed how often when I would be sitting at the children's desk, people would try to avoid to have me help them, unless I was the only person at the desk. Anyone else was preferable to having me help them. I made note of this to one of my employees, and she said that she had noticed how often people came to her for assistance. From that point on, she made a point of noting to patrons that I was the librarian in the scenario. Maybe you think I'm imagining things. Maybe you think I'm seeing racism where there is none. Or maybe you're shaking your head and wondering how things like this can still be happening in our world. You might be thinking of how strong I am to come away from such incidents without being consumed by hatred or anger. Well, I'm here to tell you that I am angry. I get frustrated at how people think that identity politics are what is tearing our country apart, as opposed to our country's deeply seated racism. When people don't see color, what they don't see is their own privilege. I love Chalice and its members. I'm proud to be a UU, but sometimes I get frustrated at how Unitarian Universalism has missed the boat sometimes with regards to race. My first MLK Day service here as a member of this church was torture for me. It was uncomfortable to have people turn around and stare at me as the only African-American person in the room. And then afterwards, I was surrounded by well-meaning white people who were eager to tell me that they weren't racist, why their best friend was black. The experience had such an impact on me that I swore I would never again go to an MLK service. The next year, I was working with the youth in the YRUU high school group, and I, along with my co-advisors Tim, Laura, and Tom, decided to celebrate what we called White Liberal Guilt Day. We found online cards for White Liberal Guilt Bingo, which we played with the kids. So you can see there are cards that are points that I don't even see color. What did country music ever do to anyone? I was taught that country music was the music of our oppressors. So I've never listened to country music. Charlie Pride was a confusing point in my childhood. You don't see me trying to play the race card. There was an actual artist who made up race cards that you could print out so that if anyone actually accused you of playing the race card, you could hand it to the person you were talking to. So we found online cards for White Liberal Guilt Bingo, and we played with the kids. The ones we used were similar to this up here on the screen, which is courtesy of the online publication McSweeney's. We showed them literal race cards. We talked about what liberal white guilt was and why it was detrimental. Our kids were game to play along and discuss these issues with us, and it proved to be a much more useful way to spend MLK Day at church than being objectified and othered. I decided recently, however, that it was time to end my MLK Day embargo. Reverend Nika asked me to share some of my experiences and to share my thoughts regarding MLK Day. That's why I'm up here today. I decided it was time to help change the culture of Unitarian Universalism. I felt that I was ready to finally get out of my own head and try to help transform the world through justice and compassion. I hope you'll take to heart some of what I've said today. I hope you'll listen to some of the suggestions that Reverend Nika will share on how you can help. And most of all, I hope that you'll never tell me that your best friend just happens to be black.
So at 3 in the morning last night, I got up to rewrite what I was going to say today. I'm serious, I've been awake since then and rewrote 2/3 of the sermon. I couldn't stop thinking about Ayana's words. Ayana, you've been so courageous and so honest and so willing to be vulnerable and put yourself out there. It can't be easy telling a group of people that you love and who love you, that there's some hard truths we need to know. I'm humbled and grateful for your willingness to speak your truth and show up on Martin Luther King Day even when it's been hard for you. Honestly, I feel that whatever I have to say pales in comparison to you sharing the truth of your everyday reality and the struggles that you have to confront in a predominantly white neighborhood and congregation. And I am deeply sorry. As I was lying in bed in the middle of the night thinking about today, I realized that in the very act of speaking after you as the white minister telling other white people what to do about racism, I am offering you and other people of color, and I see it doesn't even make sense what I wrote, but that was because it was 3 in the morning, so forgive me. Because I fear that this may just be another sucky MLK Day for you, listening to liberal white guilt. So I basically threw out most of my sermon. And I guess if I were to sum it up, what I was going to say to honor the memory of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., it's that we're still fighting the battle of equality and respect 60 years after the Civil Rights Movement and 500 years after slavery began in this country. So what can those of us who identify as white do to tackle this problem that has existed since the founding of this country? Well, not really the founding, because the country existed a long time before that. It began with colonizers lying to, oppressing, and killing Native Americans. And it continued with capturing and enslaving 12.5 million Africans. 12.5 million Africans between 1525 and 1866. We're dealing with a 500-year legacy of systemic racism that is deeply ingrained in the fabric of our flag, of our nation's structures, of our institutions and systems. And it's not a problem that we're going to be able to overcome overnight, especially since we've not done all the necessary truth and reconciliation work around this. Martin Luther King's goal was to keep fighting the injustice of racism until all children live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And clearly we're not there yet. For Ayanna and other people of color, racism is not just a concept. It's not an issue. It's a daily, if not hourly, lived struggle in this country. And I'm immensely grateful and humbled that Ayanna had the courage to share that struggle with us, because it offers those of us whose daily realities are different a deeper, truer, more honest understanding of the problem, doesn't it? Clearly, there's much work to be done, my friends. Racism is not a thing of the past. The universalist part of our faith teaches us that until we are all equal, all liberated from oppression, all respected and cared for by society, then none of us is truly free. Since we're all interconnected, injustices that affect some affect us all. And doing nothing while others suffer hardens our hearts. Inaction stops us from truly being able to experience love on this earth. And please turn your cell phones off. So the racism that Ayanna faces in everyday life, in her job, or when she goes to Target, for goodness sake, should call us all to action. We're talking about integrity this month, my friends, aren't we? And my question to all of us is, how can we live in our integrity when some among us are daily dealing with prejudice and such injustice? The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, on some questions, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it polite? And vanity comes along and asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when we must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but we must do it because conscience tells us it is right. And my conscience tells me that though we've made important strides in the struggle against racism in the last 60 years, since Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement broke ground, we've not yet done enough to eradicate this awful injustice. To do what's right, to do what conscience demands, we must take steps continuously to right the wrongs of hundreds of years of harm and repair the harm that's been done. Of course, that's an impossible job, really, isn't it? To right the wrongs of hundreds of years? There is no amount of work that any of us can do in our lifetime that could eradicate the scourge of slavery, of lynching, of terrorism, of blowing up people's homes, of Jim Crow laws, of segregation, and of every day treating people of color differently, is there? But my friends, we mustn't throw up our hands and give up. No, we mustn't. We must, each of us in our own way, do what we can. And we must begin by not ignoring the problem, which is easy for us white people to do. I know that myself. So here's how I think those of us who identify as white can begin. Basically, I think it boils down to 4 things. First, we must educate ourselves. Secondly, we must listen to people's stories whose lives are different to ours with a desire to learn and understand. Thirdly, respect those stories and experiences. Don't argue with them and tell them you think you know better. And finally, advocate. Go out there and work for change. It's simple. Let's unpack this a little bit further. We need to begin by educating ourselves. And although we as a congregation got a gift by Ayana sharing her story today, we shouldn't wait for people of color to teach us about racism. We need to inform ourselves, to learn about the real history of racial oppression in America. And not just about the statistics and facts around race, but by listening to stories and learning about the actual and diverse experiences of people of color. And we need to listen with curiosity and a desire to learn and to understand. We need to listen with respect, with open minds and undefensively, not denying or invalidating people's experiences, but earnestly seeking to empathize rather than espousing our own viewpoint. Open our hearts so that we can understand the struggle better, and by caring, get motivated to do something. Now, doing something looks like taking the Beloved Conversations program that we're offering here beginning next month. It looks like reading and learning and reflecting and joining our racial justice group, which is another way to further educate yourself. But also, it looks like getting out and advocating for what you know is right. Omid Safi, a professor of Islamic mysticism at the Duke University, says, if you have an inner voice telling you that how this country is now is not right, that these shootings aren't right, that racism isn't right, that treating immigrants as they are being treated isn't right, then honor that voice. It's your heart reminding you that love is real and that there is a more beautiful way to live. Nurture this voice and link it to others. Last week I saw the movie Just Mercy. And it's about the life of human rights lawyer Bryan Stevenson, whose mission is to advocate for the unjustly incarcerated and overturn false death row sentences in Alabama. And I urge you to see that movie. It's powerful and enlightening. Now, together with some of you, I had the gift of hearing Stevenson speak at our General Assembly in New Orleans a few years ago. A Harvard-educated lawyer, Stevenson could have gotten any high-powered legal position and made a lot of money. Instead, he's devoted his life to creating the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama, a human rights organization, fighting for people wrongly convicted as a result of our racist criminal justice system. And I was in tears throughout the movie, witnessing the lies and our bigoted system, which is clearly rigged against people of color. And I cut portions of the sermon talking further about his work, but I'm happy to share it with you if you email me or if you join our racial justice group. So what else can we do in the field of advocacy following the example of Bryan Stevenson? We can work to change systems and laws that discriminate. We can advocate for the just treatment of immigrants or the incarcerated. We can support the leadership of organizations of color. And go attend tomorrow's Martin Luther King Jr. march in Oxnard. It's early, I know, but go. I wish I could come. I'm flying to Arizona tomorrow morning for a ministers' conference. But we can also work to change the narrative of fear and anger, which claims that white people will suffer by giving people of color equal treatment, or that immigrants are going to steal the jobs of Americans. My friends, we must stand up to these lies with facts and change the narrative. This is not a zero-sum game. And there are more day-to-day ways where white people can step up to fight racism. We can invite other white people to think empathically about race and not let racist comments and actions go unopposed. An article by Derek Clifton on how to fight everyday racism says, it's important not to conflate other oppressions with racism, like saying, oh, I know what it's like because I'm gay, or I'm a woman, or I'm poor, or I'm disabled. Unless you have walked in someone else's shoes and lived in their body and had their experiences, we cannot know their reality. Clifton also reminds us that oppressions are intersectional. The experience of a gay, poor white man, for example, may be very different to that of a gay, poor black man. Remember that a variety of marginalized identities compound to make life even more challenging. Think about the terror that trans women of color are currently suffering as a result of their varied intersectional identities. But most of all, my friends, it's an awakening, as Ayanna said, to become aware of our privilege. Whether it's being male, or being white, or heterosexual, or financially comfortable. All of these lead to experiences of privilege that others may not share. So becoming aware of our own levels of privilege allows us to grow compassion and understanding for those who do not enjoy the same. Call out and reject oppressions that you witness or hear if you want to be allies. So, my friends, if our conscience calls us to do what is right on this Martin Luther King Day, we need to do more than pay homage to a great man. To honor his legacy, we need to get to work. We need to educate ourselves, to listen, to respect, and advocate. So ask your conscience what is right, and do that thing, even if it is hard or uncomfortable. See where your heart breaks, where you are moved to tears, and work to heal those issues. Stay hopeful, Brian Stevenson says, because hope is the enemy of injustice. Stay hopeful and keep striving to build the beloved community on this earth as Martin Luther King called us to do. This, my friends, is how we can honor the memory of this great spiritual and American justice leader. This is how we do what's right and how we live with integrity. May it be so. Amen.